a big part of the film, and I couldn't help but think, and people watching the film this will probably spring to their mind about Quentin Tarantino and the topic of stylized violence. The violence that you show is stylized. It's artistic, and there's there's a joy and a satisfaction, and people will understand why this may be the case with Jera, with your lead character. I have seen The Flood, and a few questions. Obviously, I want to ask you about it. I wanted to get started though, asking you, Victoria, where did the idea for The Flood come for you? I mean, obviously, it deals with 1940s era, World War II era Australia, and the Australian government and religious organizations, and the abhorrent way that they treated Aborigines, Aboriginal tribes people, and the native people of Australia. Kind of flesh that out for us, Victoria, and tell us where that idea came from, and what you wanted to bring across in your film on the screen in terms of the impact on your audience.
Well, that's quite a far-reaching and complex question, John.
I know it is. The best you can do.
All right.
Well, just what
Okay.
was your?
So
what you want to do
I'll
with
go
it?
back. Okay, I'll go back to a different answer to what I normally give, and go right back to the kernel of the moment. I had been wanting to make a short film a few years ago, and I was quite inspired by Django Unchained at the time, and I thought, we're not really in Australia. We haven't or hadn't reached the point yet where First Nations people were being represented in that way, in that kind of powerful warrior, cool, amazing kind of characters, or not that I was seeing. And I wanted to make a short film that kind of did that. And I was doing a lot of research, and I do have a love of that particular era. And what I discovered was, when First Nations soldiers from Australia went and fought for this country in World War II, they were promised citizenship. And when they returned, they were still denied citizenship, not considered to be human beings even. And in the ultimate insult, the government took their own homelands and gave them to white soldiers as part of the soldier settlement scheme at the end of the war. So not only did they fight for this country, they also had their home taken and given to their mates for them to then live on. And I was so incensed by that I made a short film, Miro, which is about that, and it sort of encompasses many of the other things that First Nations people were going through at the time. And that film called Miro, starring Mark Cole Smith, the woman who played his wife was Alexis Lane in that film, and it was a very small part. But she was so brilliant, and I thought, I want to make a film for her. And I was wondering, well, what's it like for people of color, or women of color, and First Nations women at that time? So The Flood was kind of born out of telling that story within that complex political, social web, that historical web that Australia was and still is. So even though it's set back, in the 40s, it's still incredibly relevant for where we are now. So yeah, I guess that's how it came to be.
Well, yeah, and that leads to my next question, Victoria. What, in your opinion and your assessment, is the relationship with the Australian government, Australian authorities, and its native tribes people and countrymen and women. Where does it stand now in your view?
Long way to go still, I would say. There's politically, there's a lot of resources put into First Nations programs, but on the whole, they're not actually dealing directly with the First Nations people when they set them up. So there still isn't that level of consultation and collaboration that we need to have in order to move forward as a united country. And again, this film is kind of a microcosm of that. It's looking at, okay, how can we unify? And ultimately, that is what the film is about, that reconciliation, that redemption, that unification of us as people. And yeah, it still needs to happen.
You know, that resonates with me. I had a job, a position where I worked with the Native American community in America, and so much of this parallels your movie, and the history of Australia parallels the Native American experience in our country, in the United States. And tremendous progress has been made, but and I saw this firsthand. It's not enough, and that resonates in your film in terms of what's going on in this particular era of our history in the 1940s. But there was an idea too that boy, while things have improved, it's, okay, we're fine where we are. Let's just stop and everything's great. And that really made an impact on me watching your movie, because, like I say, that's something that connects with most Americans in terms of the experience of Native American tribes people in the U.S. It's just interesting. I've never, even with Tarantino and Scorsese, and I watched a lot of films, never seen it depicted quite the way you did. It was, I want to say comical, Victoria, but it wasn't comical. And that clearly was by intent.
Yeah. So interesting that you mentioned Tarantino, because of course I think he is quite an influence. I mean, I love his work, but for me, where I feel, and with Scorsese and the people you talk about, with their violence, it doesn't leave room for feeling, for you to be able to feel throughout the experience of it. And so I think the way I handled it was, it is almost like a dance too, in many ways. I mean, there's quite a lot of different periods of shootouts and violence and in the film, and I think each of them's probably a little bit different. So I might give a different answer to each of those scenes if I were talking about it. But you mentioned Jarrah, and I'm assuming you're talking about the bar scene. Oh, am I correct?
Yes, you are. That's one of them. That was that particularly struck me that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, I wanted the enjoyment of that, of seeing that scene unfold in that way, and I enjoy it immensely on a personal level. I love that.
I did.
And yes,
I believe.
Yeah, and it does have that lightness in there, but then that is contrasted by what happens immediately after that violence, which I think we never get to see in films, or I haven't seen it yet, not to say it doesn't exist, where we have to deal with the consequences of what it does to us emotionally to become that. And so I wanted you to be really getting off on that scene and enjoying it, and then having to face the consequences of that. And I think, as humans, that is a really important thing for us to do, because we are flooded by images of violence that we never have to think about. It's just there. So and I wonder too if that doesn't make us immune to it, or make a world where we allow that to exist more than is healthy for us.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Following that violence with that's with what Jara then goes on to experience,
yeah.
I think is something that I wanted to look at, and for all of us to look at, I guess.
The film is The Flood, and it emanates from Australia, and the writer, director, and co-producer is the woman who we've just been talking to here over the last several moments, Victoria Wharfe McIntyre. Victoria, thanks so much for joining us, and all the best with The Flood and your further adventures in film down the line.
Thank you so much, John, and I hope people will go and see it, or don't even have to go anywhere to see it. Just turn on your TV.
There you go.